Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to be taking a look at the first two Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man comics, and in particular, how they fit in with the brand new animated series on Disney+. Keep in mind that there are 5 total comics with 3 yet to come out, and the last one is supposedly such a spoiler, they won't even tell us what the cover is. So, there will be spoilers for the first 2 issues of the comics, as well as the first 2 episodes of the Disney+ show, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. We've now entered a new month, so we have a new contest. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And that means it's time to announce the January winner, or I should say winners, because I still have not heard back from some of the Christmas winners, so I pick a new person after 30 days. So anybody here who's listed, reach out to me on the About page of my channel, by my email or my Discord, and I'll get your prize right away. And I do want to point out, the Avengers Kang Dynasty video had 1,716 comments, the most comments ever on a video on my channel. People had a lot of opinions about that script. Crazy. Also, don't forget we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. All right, so let's talk first about what Marvel is telling us about these comics. This is from the actual Marvel.com website, and they let us know that in this new comic series, you can take the very first steps along with Peter as he discovers his powers, decides to become a hero, and even picks out his name and costume. So basically, it is a prequel to the animated series on Disney+. And then I love this coordination between the show and the comic. Christos Gage, who is the writer of the comics, said that Jeff is the showrunner of the animated series and has been working closely with us to make sure the comic meshes perfectly with the show. It's all the same big story. If you dig one, you're going to want the other. And if you ask me, you'll want them both. Love that. And then in response, Jeff Trammell, who's the showrunner for the animated show on Disney+, said, "All I can share at this time is that the comic and the show support one another. The show will answer some questions you may have about the comic, and the comic will do the same for the show, which is very important for us and the excellent Marvel Comics crew." Really, really cool how well this is all tying together. So let's do our breakdown of issue number 1. These are the 2 different covers for the comic, and let's dive right in. So the comic starts right off with a teaser of what's to come later, probably in issue 5 of the series, as we see someone about to throw Peter off a ledge. That someone happens to be Man Mountain Marco, who you probably recognize from the comics. But then here's what's really cool. They tell us that we're now going to go back in time weeks earlier. Keep that in mind, weeks earlier. So where are we going back in time to? Well, basically right after the attack in the first episode on Disney+, because we see the destruction behind them, and Peter and Nico are introducing themselves to each other, and the spider's about to chomp on Peter. Of course, this is from the comic, and in the animated series episode 1, we see the same thing happening. They're introducing each other, and the spider chomps down on Peter. However, it's worth noting, in the animated series, he basically collapses, and then we get this, a few months later. So we jump forward a few months. So my theory is that the comics will tell us what happened during that few months that the animated series on Disney Plus skipped. In fact, remember, they said they're jumping backwards a few weeks. I think those few weeks are what's happening during that skip in the Disney Plus series. All right, so let's pick right up and see what happens next. So we see in the comics that Peter wakes up from having fainted, and then this discussion on the right is really interesting. He doesn't want to go to the hospital because he says, haven't we spent enough time in hospitals for a while? And May says, I know, but if something was wrong, Ben would be devastated to think he had anything to do with you not taking care of yourself. So that seems to imply a couple things. Uncle Ben's death is recent, and they were probably in the hospital for a while, so maybe he got injured and had a slow death, possibly? I really want to know more about Uncle Ben's death. I hope we find out at some point. Okay, so then next, the school experiences a big explosion. And keep in mind, this is already after the whole battle with Doctor Strange and the symbiote that was in the first episode on Disney+. So they've already left. And now the school has a big explosion? My word. So the paramedic says it looks like a gas explosion and wants everybody to go home and get out of here because it's way too dangerous. All right, so what do? Well, you head to Delmar's Deli Grocery, right? Of course, we remember Delmar from the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. But then notice the dude with the broom there? He's about to knock over those boxes, and luckily, Peter leaps out of the way and saves the cat in the process. So he's actually faster than the cat. So this is why he starts to realize something happened after that spider bite. So then they head home and they get a visit from Nico's foster mom as well as Nico herself. So there's a lot going on here to discuss. First of all, we all remember Nico from the Runaways series. And it's interesting, in this universe, the Runaways series must have happened earlier because she's already left LA. Now she's in New York and has a foster mom. Of course, because her mom in the series, as you remember, looked like this. And she's out of the picture. She has run away, if you will, from that mom. So something else, though, I want to point out. Look at the foster mom's name. Susan O'Hara. Where have we heard that last name before? Oh, that's right, Miguel O'Hara. Now, I know you may immediately be saying, dude, you're pulling stuff together that isn't tied together. Stop. Well, keep in mind, remember during that battle with Doctor Strange and the symbiote, the spider came from that portal. So a lot of people have been wondering, are there ties to the Spider-Verse? Because that's the same way Miles, remember, was bitten from a spider from a different universe. So I have no idea if they're going to tie into Spider-Verse or not. But wow, how fascinating that mom's last name is O'Hara. They're messing with us if there's not some tie coming down the road later. All right, so anyway, we get it established that indeed Nico was in LA, and now she's trying to start over with a new life here in New York. And Peter is also trying to start a new life. This is really interesting. He says, at my old school, I was the kid everyone ignored until they wanted someone to copy from or shove in a locker. But then he says, for a hot minute, I was that poor kid whose uncle died, which was worse. Okay, now we're really getting an idea of when Uncle Ben died. It obviously wasn't over the summer because it happened while he was still in junior high before he went to high school, probably near the end of his final semester in junior high. Man, I really want more on Uncle Ben. I hope they keep giving us more information on his death. Okay, so this is fascinating. Something strange is going on at the school because Peter says, well, they'll rebuild Midtown soon, right? They have to. But Nico says, hello, do you actually read independent local news? Some real estate conglomerate's been trying to buy the land the school's on for years now. If the damage is bad, I bet the city sells, because what else are they going to do? Raise taxes with elections coming? Okay, a lot to unpack here. First of all, elections coming, so that's establishing we're prior to November, but we kind of knew that. This is obviously September. But more importantly, a real estate conglomerate is trying to buy up land? So hold on to that thought. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But I want to point out that they're going to go do some Scooby-Doo investigating of that explosion. They want to know what's going on. But this whole idea of a real estate conglomerate trying to buy up land that, is now worth a lot less, doesn't that totally remind you of what Butane was doing in the second episode of the Disney Plus series? The developer's paying me buku bucks to burn this whole block down so they can buy it back for cheap. You're looking at the future site of 52nd Street's newest luxury high-rise. So somebody seems to be trying to destroy a lot of property, reduce the value, and buy it up. I wonder who. That is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. All right, so now they go to check out the damage, and sure enough, Peter says a bunch of this damage was caused in the attack, but it looks like the explosion that came after was a separate thing. And it's also worth noting, see the little red asterisk, which is really kind of a small spider after the word attack? I love how they do the thing we see in so many comics these days where they say, see the first episode of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man on Disney Plus for details of the mysterious attack. Because remember, again, that attack with Doctor Strange and the symbiote happened before the comic picks up. I just love how tightly integrated everything is. Okay, so they do find that the fire was intentionally set. They find evidence of that. In fact, Peter's like, wait, that's arson. Who would do that? Well, Nico has been doing some digging on the real estate conglomerate, and it turns out that once you get through all the shell corporations, it's owned by the brother-in-law of this guy. Yes, Silvo Manfredi, the mob boss. Okay, if you recognize that name, that's because he is, in the comics, Silvermane. And who works with him? Man Mountain Marco. Remember, we saw him at the beginning, about ready to throw Spider-Man off the building. Now, you might also remember Silvermane as becoming basically Robot Man. I don't think that's going to happen in this series, but anything's possible. But yeah, sure enough, these goons who work for Silvo, a la Silvermane, are sent into the school to destroy the evidence that they did that explosion. Crazy. So you might remember the Manfredi family because they did appear, well, almost appeared in Far From Home. You can find them in the Peter's to-do list that shows all the scenes they didn't put in the movie. And also the Manfredi family showed up in Agent Carter because this is Joseph Manfredi who caused a lot of trouble for her even way back in the 40s. Another reason Agent Carter needs to be made canon, Marvel. Keep that in mind, please. Put it on the Disney Plus timeline. Anyway, so Peter, now fleeing those goons, realizes he has powers because he can't get out this door, and he actually breaks the lock with his bare hands. He also picks up some concrete blocks to shield himself from the bullets they're shooting at him. So yeah, crazy. And then once he gets outside, he is so excited as he realizes, I can even climb the walls like a spider. And he realizes, I have abilities like Captain America. So nice name drop. He says, I took on 4 huge guys. One of them had a gun. And then it sinks in. I got shot at. I could have died. And then, of course, he vomits into the trash can. So we don't need to see that. But yeah, he basically is realizing just how dangerous what he did really was. Then he gets home and realizes, I need a costume. So looking up at his hero, Captain America, he says, Peter Parker can't risk crossing those guys, but maybe someone else could. Okay, so we're finally getting to see what made him become Spider-Man in this universe. It wasn't Uncle Ben's death, great power, great responsibility speech. It was just him realizing I can make a difference just like my hero, Captain America. Very, very cool. All right, so Silvermane, however, does not think it's cool. So I love this. In the Manhattan headquarters of Silvermane Hair Products for Men, too funny, we see he is very upset. He's standing there with his bodyguard, Man Mountain Marco, and he says, this is unacceptable, Marco. We can't have it in our territory. It used to be that the likes of Captain America kept to where they belonged. Wars, espionage, outer space. But things are changing. Look at what's become of Hell's Kitchen. Nice name drop for Hell's Kitchen and Daredevil, obviously. So he decides it's time to summon the Enforcers. Yikes. So that's the end of issue number 1. All right, so now we move on to issue number 2, which obviously is going to feature him battling Crusher Hogan. In fact, it's the first page of the comic. So we see him squaring off against Crusher Hogan, and I want to zoom in a little bit here because this is actually more important than it seems at first. So this dude says, welcome back to Tripp's Tournament of Titans, which is to backyard wrestling what my parents' estate is to backyards. So basically, he's doing this in his parents' backyard. That's hilarious. But we're going to see this dude show up again, just kind of keep him in mind. But I also love this. Definitely a nice homage to when Spider-Man took on Crusher Hogan in the comics. Notice he's wearing basically the same outfit. Really, really close. All right, so also we see that Crusher Hogan is still doing his fights because in episode 2 of the Disney Plus series, we see this on the news footage. So definitely Tripp's backyard cage matches are becoming more and more popular because that is a huge crowd there. All right, so starts off with Crusher Hogan pretty much kicking his butt, like, ouch, that looks really painful for poor Peter. But eventually, no surprise, Peter gets the upper hand and literally launches him into orbit. Yikes. So then luckily he runs and prevents a giant splat by catching him, and he dunks him in a trash can, saying that until I can figure out how hard I throw, it's Spider-Man no more. So Crusher Hogan's there in the trash can saying, I should have taken that bouncer job. But of course, Spider-Man No More is an homage to when Peter gave up being Spider-Man in the comics, and of course, when Tobey's Spider-Man did it in Spider-Man 2. So very, very cool. All right, so speaking of trying to figure out his own strength, we see a few days later that he's now doing some tests, trying to figure out, does stuff stick to my hands? How far can I throw it? To get a better idea of his strength. And then we see that he realizes how handy it would be to have webbing of his own as he looks over at that spider, and so he starts working on his formula with some pretty hilarious results at first. Then notice 2 days later, he decides it's time to test it out, but what he didn't consider is he would get stuck in the webbing too. So he literally has to wait, uncomfortably close to 2 hours later for it to dissolve. And then we see him meeting with Nico that night as she explains, hey, good news, Rockford T. Bales High School has now accepted us. And I think this is cool. She says it's more athletic focused than STEM oriented, but its academics are still top notch. And we saw in the animated series that it is indeed very athletics oriented because Lonnie Lincoln is, of course, the star quarterback. But remember, he's also very smart, showing it's also a STEM-based school. So very cool. And then we're off to the first day at their new high school. Notice it says the following Monday, and they're chatting about what it's going to be like. And Nico says, well, we're probably smarter than all of them. And Peter says, well, except we're not. The brochure said the grade point average here is 3.8. Average is 3.8. Oh, my word. So yeah, very smart kids. Okay, and so then we meet the dude who I'm betting might be the Flash Thompson equivalent in this universe, because here he is threatening Peter, and Peter realizes, oh great, of course, that Trip guy goes to school here too. But he says, calm down, Pete, he only knows you as Spider-Man. So wild, right? It's that dude that was doing the cage fighting that Crusher Hogan was in. So yeah, see why he's kind of like Flash Thompson? He knows Spider-Man and thinks he's really cool, and he already hates Peter Parker. Love that. Okay, so then we see that night, Peter has now mixed up the perfect formula of webbing and made sure that it does not stick to his clothes and his costume. And he decides to go try it out. In fact, he's doing some superheroing, and the news picks it up, notice, because there's a news ticker along the bottom that says Captain America PSA meme goes viral. And of course, that's referring to our good old buddy Captain America and those hilarious PSAs from Homecoming. So at least in this universe, those were already out and being shown by this point. So very funny. However, Silvermane does not think it's funny. He's watching this on TV and he is very ticked off. Although, honestly, he looks more like Aunt May from the comics than he does Silvermane, but we're going to let that go. Anyway, he's very ticked off, and he brings in the Enforcers to take care of this Spider-Man. Of course, you remember the Enforcers? They were one of Spider-Man's first villains from all the way back in issue number 10. And then we move to the next evening, and Peter decides it's time to go superheroing with his giant web fluid tanks. They look like scuba tanks, my word. Thank goodness, at least by the animated series on Disney Plus, he's reduced it down to that smaller tank, but we're going to see the tank in general causes him real problems this time around. So, as he's out swinging, he realizes he has an instinct, maybe a sense, right? His spider sense, because he detects the Enforcers beating down some poor store manager. So he goes in to fight them, but boy, it does not go well. Fancy Dan dodges his webs, then kicks him right in the stomach. The ox totally smacks him in the head. That looks really painful. Then out comes Montana, not using a lasso, but actually a whip, and he uses it to break Spider-Man's webbing, so of course it doesn't shoot anymore, and then Ox takes care of it for good, ripping off those cords, so basically he has no webbing. Then Fancy Dan does this really nasty blow to his head, and I thought maybe he was knocked out, but we do see him thinking, at least to himself, as he says, I really need to stop thinking. I'm ready for things I'm absolutely not ready for. So they leave us there at the end of the second issue. Big time cliffhanger. Cannot wait to see what happens next. But let's talk briefly about the overall timeline, because you probably noticed they are giving us incredible timeline management. So really quickly going through this, they start with weeks earlier. That's the orientation at Midtown High. Then that night, that's when Susan and Nico bring over dinner. Then later that night, that's when Peter and Nico explore the damage to the school. Now, I'm really bummed. This is the only place they don't tell us the amount of time between events, but I'm betting Peter takes on Crusher Hogan within the next day or so. He was very excited to try out his powers. Anyway, then a few days later, he tests out his strength and makes web shooters. 2 days after that, he tests his much too sticky webbing. The following Monday is their first day at Bales High. That night, he tests out his new webbing, and the next evening is his fight with the Enforcers. So you can see, I think every issue of the comics is going to span this several weeks. So now we eagerly await for the next issues to arrive, and unfortunately, the next one doesn't come until February 19th. Oh man. In fact, we have to wait until March 26th and April 23rd for the final ones to come, but I do plan on breaking them down very soon after they come out. So let me know your thoughts. Do you like how this comic series is so tightly connecting in with the Disney Plus series? I think it's brilliant. So don't forget, February contest, be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook, and there's that membership option in case you're interested in that. And then I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the MCU official tie-in comic chat talking about, well, the tie-in comics, right? So we have 1,900 members across the globe, conversations happening 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join us. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.